We now want to welcome on an absolute legend in the New York Rangers community, someone who's covered the Rangers since 1978 through the 2021-22 season. Got a new book out titled The Franchise. It's forwarded by Brian Leach. I'd like to welcome on Rick Carpiniello to Forever Blueshirts. Rick, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so happy to talk about this book because it was quite a project and I really enjoyed doing it. And I probably could have written three times as much as I did. In the time between when I finished it and now, I've probably thought of 100 other stories that I could have put in there. But thanks for having me. I really love talking about it.
So for those that don't know, the book, The Franchise, it goes through the Rangers' history, the highs, lows, everything in between. For you, other than 94, because I feel like that's the obvious answer, which season for you as a writer was the most memorable?
The first season, I think, for sure. When I jump on the bandwagon in 78, 79, and I'm covering high school football and high school volleyball, and all of a sudden I'm at Rangers training camp. And then to watch that team go through the season and through the Stanley Cup playoffs to a 1-0 lead in the Stanley Cup final over a Montreal team that's about to win its fourth straight. That was just an incredible season. And I still say to this day that no team in NHL history has had more fun in the playoffs than that team did. And in the end, it probably cost them too. But they had a blast, and they lived the high life, and they enjoyed every minute of it.
Yeah, I remember you talked about I believe it was after game one, the incidents that were going down outside the Rangers hotel. Not sure you could repeat exactly what was
Yeah,
going on, but it is definitely looked like a team that really enjoyed themselves.
yeah, and not all of them obviously were out every night, but some of them were. Some of them were certainly, and Ron Duguay admitted as much that they enjoyed the nightlife right into the Stanley Cup Finals in Montreal. And most of the team, including mostly Phil Esposito, thought they should get out of Montreal between games because they feared that exactly that was going to happen. I don't know that won or lost, or I don't know that lost the series for them. Um, it, it probably could have been, they probably would have been better off not partying, but the Canadiens ultimately just took over that series. And the Canadiens were one of the great teams of all time back then. The Rangers had their Stanley Cup the series before when they knocked off the Islanders, who then went on to win 19 consecutive playoff series and 4 Stanley Cups. So, that was quite an accomplishment in itself. Leading the Canadiens 1-0 in games and 2-0 in game two, that would have been unbelievable. That would have been just a remarkable, unlikely a Stanley Cup champion as you'd ever have. But it didn't happen. The Canadiens took over, and again, if they had partied or if they hadn't partied, the Canadiens probably still would have won that series. But they did party and they did lose.
I know I mentioned we weren't going to talk about 94 in that last question. This time we will. So my dad, who is a Ranger fan, got married in April of 1994. And while he may tell my mom that the wedding is the happiest day of that year for him, I know deep down it was June 14th. For you, what do you remember leading up to that game? And then obviously the game itself and the celebration and just the craziness afterwards.
Yeah, I just remember how tense that Garden was. Like, it was loud and people were pumped. There's no question. It was the hottest ticket in Garden history, probably. Although Game 5 was right there with it. When they first had a chance to clinch. But having lost games 5 and 6, and then having to come back, and there was utter panic among the fans, and there was also utter chaos around the team. Remember, Mike Keenan wanted to move the team to Lake Placid for a practice day between games 6 and 7, just to get away from the media, which is, that's insane. Mark Messier and Kevin Lowe talked them out of that, but they almost went to Lake Placid for practice. And then I just remember the Garden, the feel in the Garden it was excited as could be, but it was as nervous as you could feel it. And Glenn Healy said that 8 million people had already dialed the 9 and the 1 and were ready to just getting ready to dial the next one. but that was the feeling in the building. It was a nervous excitement.
So just as someone that I wasn't alive for 1994, so I didn't get to experience any of that. Just, post game, just what that was like.
Yeah, that was as expected, as crazy as could be. The Rangers locker room at the time was a really small room, and if you got in, you couldn't get out, and it took a while to get in because everybody had their families and their friends and all kinds of hangers on in there. Every person associated with the organization was in there. Obviously the champagne was going crazy, and the cup was in there. Everybody was drinking out of the cup. But the thing I remember most is before they exited the ice, the way they took the cup around and let people reach over the glass and touch it. And that was just a sign of how they were going to share that championship with the city. And they did, man. That night at their party at the auction house was wild. And the Stanley Cup all of a sudden was everywhere. And I'm still convinced to this day that the other teams like the Yankees, et cetera, their fans picked up that "Let's Go Rangers" chant, and they do Derek Jeter and et cetera. That's all from the "Let's Go Rangers" chant that I think they really picked up the night that they won the cup, and then the night that Mark Messier and Brian Leetch brought the cup to Yankee Stadium. And I think that spread, that chant spread through New York, and then it spread through sports, and now everybody sings that song or sings a song to that tune. But it was always "Let's Go Rangers" before that. I don't recall it ever being sung in any other arena.
I definitely gotta love having hockey be an influence on a bunch of other sports here in the New York area. Obviously, fans and players, they got their own emotions that go through games. But for you, and I guess everybody on press row as well during that game, what was the feeling like? What was the thought process of everybody in press row during that game?
Yeah, it was a lot like Game 7 against the Devils too, where you're writing a story it's going to be an historic story one way or the other, but you've got to be ready to write it both ways and have a version of it sent at the buzzer. Now, well, a lot of us sent that story in Game 7 against the Devils before Zelepukin scored, and now we're scrambling. We've got 18 minutes to rewrite everything in case it goes the other way. But the feeling in Game 7 against Vancouver was this is epic. I mean, they're going to break the curse here, or it's going to add to the list of chokes, and this is going to be at the top of the list. This is going to be, 0 for 55, going on 0 for 83, maybe. And so it's not an easy task for a writer to have a win or die like that, and to write it properly, and to give it the emphasis that it's going to deserve no matter which way it goes. And when it got to 3-2 and Vancouver's clanging pucks off the post, there's a lot of panic in the press box for sure. Absolutely. And, I don't think any of us are rooting one way or the other, but we know we've got a huge story on our hands, and we're going to have to wrap this up really quickly and find a way to make it fit the moment.
So in your heart of hearts, before that series started, did you feel like, for that 54-year curse to end, it was going to take every tooth, nail, and what have you for the Rangers to pull it out? Obviously, you talk to Ranger fans, they would say there was no chance that series was going to be an easy one, and it definitely probably took some years off people's lives.
Yeah, I'm sure it did. But the thing I thought was the Devil series was a brutal, probably the greatest playoff series, the most intense playoff series I've ever seen. And those Devils were big and punishing. And I knew the Rangers were banged up. I mean, Kevin Lowe played the entire finals with a separated shoulder. Zubov was hurt. Leetch was hurt. But I thought that the Devils were the challenge, once they got through that. And really, if you look back at it, Vancouver stole Game 1 of the finals. Kirk McLean made something like 17 saves in overtime. Brian Leetch hit a crossbar, and then it resulted in a 2-on-1 that stole game 1 for Vancouver. Then the Rangers win games 2, 3, and 4. Now, granted, those weren't cakewalks, but the Rangers won 2, 3, and 4. If they'd won game 1, maybe that's a sweep. And if they didn't get distracted, maybe they win game 5. And we're looking back at the series totally differently. But the fact that they did let game 5 get away from them, and they let it get away from them, and then went up there and got pounded in game 6, there was a lot of perspiration going on around Ranger fans for sure. And I'm sure to a degree, the players too. They stuck out their chins and made sure that they embraced it as a challenge and an opportunity rather than a do or die. They didn't want that, but it wasn't an easy situation for them to control those emotions. They did it. They accomplished it. Game 7 was a great game, and you look back now and you think, what if? What if they hadn't? What if they hadn't won that game? What if they hadn't won game 6 against the Devils? What if they hadn't won game 7 against the Devils? And how loud would those 1940 chants be now?
Certainly a good thing we don't got to think about that after everything that happened. I don't think I'd be able to take it either. So getting off the 94 kick for a second, you've obviously seen a lot of players come through the New York Rangers system. In your opinion, who is the greatest Ranger that you have covered?
Well, I'm a little bit biased, as you can tell, because he wrote the forward for me. So I'm going to go Brian Leetch. I think Mark Messier was the most influential because he changed that franchise when he arrived. Brian was the best. Brian was the best all-time Ranger. And then there's, Rod Gilbert, of course, was Mr. Ranger. Just a wonderful human being and a great, great player. So yeah, I'm gonna go Leetch, but Messier was the most influential.